Thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Launchpad. I'm your host, Dave Kluge, and today I am joined with two more fantastic guests. We have Kyle Yates from the Fantasy Playbook, and we've got Alfredo Brown with the Pretend GM. Today, we're going to look at some of the guys that might be moving in free agency, and we're going to talk about some of our favorite rookies. So be sure to watch till the very end and take notes, because I got two of the best in the business coming at you today with some really, really hot tips. Next time we see Kyler Murray on a football field, what jersey will he be wearing? Kyle, go ahead and start us off here. Where do you expect to see Kyler Murray next?
Hey, you know what? It is a ton of fun to speculate at this time of year, and all these quarterbacks, hey, they could potentially be in a different spot this next year. You know what? I am going to stay boring here. I'm going to say that Kyler Murray is an Arizona Cardinal this time next year.
And, that probably is the truth, but what else are we supposed to do this time of year besides speculate? There's no football to be played. The season just ended. Free agency hasn't opened. This is absolutely speculation season. But Alfredo, let me throw the same question to you. Do you think that there is any chance that Kyler Murray leaves Arizona? And if so, where do you expect to see him play?
I think there's a bigger chance that he's playing baseball than he's playing for any other NFL team. Like he's going to stay in Arizona. They're working on everything now. I'm just like Yates, man. I'm going to be boring. I think he stays there too.
Now, this is kind of a wild situation, though. I mean, I'm not saying that quarterbacks shouldn't get an extension after 3 years, but typically when you see guys like that, it's, Patrick Mahomes, Deshaun Watson, Josh Allen, guys that are clear cut, just elite talents. And I don't know if Kyler Murray is there yet. Rookie of the year, a couple Pro Bowls, but doesn't even have a playoff win under his belt yet. So let me just kind of, riffing off of this. And Kyle, I'll ask you first. Do you think that he deserves this extension yet? Or do you think that he should kind of play year 4 before he starts looking for more money?
So I think there's two sides of it, right? You could talk about the players that you mentioned with the Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, the guys that we were like, okay, these guys are getting the extension like as soon as the day, opens up that they're eligible to get that extension, they're getting it. And then the other side of the spectrum is Baker Mayfield, the Sam Darnolds, like the guys that are just kind of like, okay, we need to see how they play out before we, talk about that contract extension. I think Kyler Murray kind of falls right in the middle of there. I think that he's one of these guys that has performed well to the point where he probably will get the contract extension. However, I don't think that he is in the class of the Josh Allen's, the Patrick Mahomes, and we like to put him in that class from a fantasy football perspective. It's different from an NFL perspective. And so I think he will get the contract extension eventually. I just don't think it's going to be one of the things where Arizona's like, oh my word, day one, we got to get this guy his extension. I don't think he necessarily is in that tier.
And I think you hit the nail on the head there. We look at Kyler Murray as an elite fantasy football QB1, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he is an elite overall quarterback. We talked about the elite guys that got their contracts, the Mahomes, Allen, and Deshaun Watson, but there were two questionable guys that got extended after year 3. And I'm talking about Jared Goff, Carson Wentz, and those contracts didn't age quite as well. So before we get into introductions, Alfredo, why don't you let me know kind of what you think Arizona should be doing right now? Are they doing the right thing by holding off?
Well, I mean, I think he still hasn't won a playoff game yet, right? Like, is that where we are? I mean, so yeah, I mean, I think they're doing the right thing by keeping dialogue open, I guess is going to be the right word, but Kyle kind of nailed it. Like, right. Like we look at Kyler as this QB1 because of fantasy, but we kind of forget that there is that big disconnect when we look at the NFL. And it's really reminding me a lot of the Baltimore and Lamar Jackson situation, where it's kind of like there's the talk of, don't worry, we'll get into it next year. And so as of right now, I think the Cardinals are doing everything that they can to kind of keep him happy, and let's just get back to playing football and all the other fun little coach speak isms that they like to put out there.
Yeah. And if you look at the resume side by side of Kyler Murray after 3 years and Lamar Jackson after 3 years, Lamar Jackson had an MVP. He had a playoff win. I mean, he had a much bigger and better resume than Kyler did. And he went out year 4 without making a peep about it. So I think Arizona's got to doing the right thing by holding off, but there's certainly going to be a lot of speculation about this throughout the offseason. Anyway, I want to thank everybody for tuning into episode 27 of the Launchpad, now on the Football Guys channels. You can find this on our YouTube page at youtube.com/footballguys. Last week, for anyone that tuned in, I was with Dave Richard at CBS and Joey Wright of Front Yard Fantasy and Razzball. We looked back at the 2021 season a little bit, talked about some of our takeaways, some of our hits, and some of our misses. But now with free agency just about 2 weeks away, it is time to officially start speculating about the 2022 season. And I am joined with Kyle Yates and Alfredo Brown as we look at some players that could possibly be getting shuffled around soon. We'll also take a quick look at the draft, considering it is combine week, talk about some of our favorite prospects, maybe if some hand sizes change that up a little bit today. But let me go ahead and start off by introducing Kyle Yates here over at the Fantasy Playbook. Kyle, I've been paying attention to what you're doing over there, and it is awesome to see that just straight up growth on the YouTube page, on the Patreon, and all that. So let everyone know where they can find your content now.
Absolutely. Well, the Twitter is still the same. It's over at Kyle Y NFL, but new location, new company. That is the Fantasy Playbook out, 2 weeks ago, stepped out and launched my own company here. So it's been awesome to see the amount of support. You mentioned the YouTube growth and things like that. Even that in and of itself, like 1.7 thousand subscribers in 2 weeks. It's just absolutely insane. So appreciative of the support. So you can find that over at youtube.com/the fantasy playbook. The website is theffplaybook.com. So yeah, definitely go check that out. But of course, the Twitter is the same at Kyle Y NFL.
And I love seeing people bet on themselves, especially somebody like you who has built up a very loyal following over the last couple of years with great analysis and all that, saying, you know what, I can do this on my own, and betting on yourself. Love to see you, Kyle, and wish you all of the luck in the future. I'm also joined with Alfredo Brown over at the Pretend GM. You're kind of doing your own thing right now as well. You and Dr. Vig been absolutely killing it. Anybody that's watched this show previously, prior to the Football Guys, might recognize Alfredo. We did a show a while back. I got connected with him, and I was just blown away by this guy. He is an absolute rising star in the industry. Cannot wait to see where he ends up soon. But Alfredo, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, thank you, man. We've been hosting the Pretend GM, Dr. Vig, and myself. I was just counting it up. It's been about 8 months now. So it's been really cool to see, not quite at the Kyle Yates trajectory, but we all start somewhere, and it's been really cool to kind of see how that's been taking off. And we've been going through our rookie rankings, and just like you mentioned, it's draft season right now. So we've been having a lot of fun with that. Doing our mock drafts and really getting into the deep dive of film. As a former scout, this is my favorite time of year. I just love the hope that this time of year brings for all of the sad football fans. I'm a Dolphins fan. I know you guys are Bears fans, so I know you know what I'm talking about right now. This time of year is great. It just brings a lot of hope.
Yeah. Let me ask you real quickly, Kyle, what type of Bears fan would you consider yourself? Because I feel like, I used to have so much optimism, and just within the last few years, I feel like I'm just turning into this eternal pessimist. Like I can't even get excited. It's like, if we're above 500, I am just putting a W on that season and considering a win.
You know what? I think that, yes, I was kind of in the same camp you were, where like a few years ago, it was like, all right, man, I think this, especially because 2018, like we went to the playoffs and of course the double doink and all that. But like, man, at this point, it's like, I'll believe it when I see it. I'll watch the games, obviously, but man, I'll believe it when I see it. When we start to put together, like we get into the playoffs and we actually win a game. Okay, then I'll start to become like really optimistic for the next year and potentially that year as well. But yeah, it's one of the things where, yeah, I'll still be loyal, but I need to see it to believe it.
It's kind of funny. It feels like fans of other teams get so excited about Justin Fields and his potential, and then Bears fans are like, right. I'm going to pump the brakes a little bit. I've seen what the Bears organization has done to some really good prospects in the past. But anyway, we won't keep talking about the Bears, but let's stick on the quarterback topic here. And Deshaun Watson, we're just going to try our best to ignore the legal issues here, but they obviously are still looming. But it seems like he is a little bit more likely to play this year than he was last season. So, regardless of where he may land, I'm just wondering, how are you guys valuing him in redraft and dynasty leagues? Do you think there's a chance he plays this year? Do you think that he gets traded? Do you think he stays with Houston? There's so many ways this can go. Alfredo, start us off here. What are you making of the Deshaun Watson situation in the 2022 offseason?
Yeah, and Dave, I know you mentioned that we're trying to kind of ignore the legal stuff and like what would the value, but you can't. Like we have to absolutely look at that. You have to bake it in. There's not a way around it. Like there just really isn't, because if there was no legal issue, he's easily a top 4, top 5 quarterback every single year that he plays. In Dynasty, it's the same thing, regardless of how bad the Texans team is around him. The problem is that I'm just not confident he plays this year. I'm not confident that the case gets resolved. The asking price from the Texans is too high. There's so many moving parts, and it's a lot to try to try to get through in your head. But if he's somehow able to play, he's a top 5, top 6 quarterback in redraft in fantasy. And I think that's just easy. Dynasty is a little bit murkier because you don't know, like, is he cleared to play? And he can play for 1 year. Does this resurface again the next year? So I think I'd be a little bit lower on him in Dynasty. I'd have a hard time choosing him as my Dynasty quarterback to lean on. But if he's able to play this year, he's a top 5 fantasy quarterback, no problem.
Yeah, and I am not a legal expert by any means. I defer to the professionals there. And Drew Davenport over at Footballguys, he's put together some great threads, just kind of staying on top of this situation as it is evolving. And he's pretty confident that he is going to be able to play this year, just with the amount of time that has taken to find evidence and that they haven't. I mean, not trying to get into the morality here, but just that they haven't found any evidence to really charge him with yet. He thinks that there's a pretty good chance that by April, a lot of this is going to get swept under the rug. So it is something interesting to think about. And I will say, though, your Dolphins, who looked like they were going to be one of the biggest suitors for Deshaun Watson, just came out yesterday and said that they are fully committed to Tua. So love to hear that. But Kyle, let's stick on the Deshaun Watson case here. Let's just, for the sake of imagination, pretend that he is cleared and he is going to be playing this year. Where's a team that you would like to see him land on?
Well, I think that the immediate spot that you can point to with Deshaun Watson, and yes, I completely echo what Alfredo said. Like, there is a lot that has to play out yet before we can even fully say, like, okay, here's the dynasty impact, right? Like, let's get rid of all this other stuff and make sure that he's even cleared to play before we really, really start to analyze it. But if we are putting on our, dream scenarios here for Deshaun Watson, how can we not talk about Denver? How can we not talk about Denver with all the playmakers that they have? They have that opening at the quarterback position, and they're saying they're going to explore every option, including Drew Lock at quarterback. And all of us are like, no, please don't consider Drew Lock at quarterback. Please, we know how that goes. But when you have guys like Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, KJ Hamler, Tim Patrick, Noah Fant, Albert Okwuegbunam, Melvin Gordon, if he's back, that's a whole other conversation. Javonte Williams, all these playmakers, you need someone who can get them the ball. And if you put even just like a Kenny Pickett out of the draft in that offense, I think that they'll be solid. But then if you add Deshaun Watson into the mix there, now we're talking about just an incredible division where you have Justin Herbert, Patrick Mahomes, Derek Carr, all in that division alongside Deshaun Watson. But then the playmakers to go along with him, that is a team that could easily, very quickly turn things around to be not only just competitive in that division and competing deep into the season, but one that could actually be atop that division with Deshaun Watson, all the playmakers that they have.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that he'd be a great fit for that team. I live out here in Colorado, though, and I can tell you every single Denver Broncos fan is ready to order their Aaron Rodgers jersey. They are dead set on it happening. I don't know if I'm quite so sure. Had you asked me a couple weeks ago, it seemed like it was kind of likely, but then we get this news coming out that the Packers are expected to place the franchise tag on Davante Adams. And then Aaron Rodgers came out and said he's kind of waiting to see what the Packers do with Davante Adams. So I think that you can kind of connect the dots here and expect that after another offseason of drama, Aaron Rodgers is once again going to return to the Green Bay Packers. But Kyle, is there any chance that you think that he plays somewhere besides Green Bay?
I actually still think that there is a possibility. Now, we're talking about the percentage chances you talked about 2 weeks ago. What would the percentage chances that I would have said that he's playing somewhere else? It would have been somewhere around like 70%. Now I'm more around like 55. I still think that it's a strong possibility that he's playing elsewhere other than Green Bay this next season. However, I do think that it's still a very strong possibility that he is in town. So I think that the Davante Adams and the franchise tag, that actually doesn't play a huge role in that for me. Like, obviously, if Rodgers is back, he wants to have his best friend and his best receiving weapon, because then if Davante Adams isn't there, who else is there, right? It's Amari Rodgers and like no one else. Everyone else is a free agent. So that's obviously a huge part of it. And there is a lot of money that has to be reworked and worked around to be able to get Aaron Rodgers back in town. But I do think that there's still a very strong possibility that he plays elsewhere this year. It just kind of backing off of that a little bit here based on what we've heard over the past couple of weeks.
Yeah. And you already talked about some of the money constraints there. My job is to try to learn as much as I possibly can about football. And I feel like the more I study and try to learn about the salary cap, the less I understand it. Right. I mean, I just can't even wrap my mind around it. It seems like every year these teams are just pulling rabbits out of hats and making miracles happen. So, as much as on paper, it seems like it's going to be very difficult for the Packers to bring back Adams and Rodgers. we've seen crazier things happen before. Personally, as a huge AJ Brown fan, I don't think there's anything I'd like to see more than Rodgers leaving the NFC North and going to Tennessee, but I'm not quite sure about that. Alfredo, before we get on to the next player, wondering if you have a take on Aaron Rodgers and what you expect to see him do next season.
So I'm just fully convinced at this point that Aaron just loves the drama. He loves the attention. It's going to be a thing where it's almost like an NBA player, an iconic NBA player that every year just wants a new 1-year deal, and it's going to be more drama. Like, how Aaron Rodgers would it be for him to stay in Green Bay all the way through Jordan Love's 5 years, and then he retires when Jordan Love's contract is over? Like, that would be the most Aaron Rodgers possible thing to do. And I don't know. I have a feeling that he's going to do that.
Yeah. And I think you bring up a good point too. I mean, it used to be, you want to get these, big long-term contracts, but I almost wonder, going completely off on a tangent here, so bear with me, but I almost wonder if Patrick Mahomes' contract is going to kind of change the way that we're looking at quarterback contracts. Obviously, you want the concern for injuries baked in, and that's why you want that long-term contract. But by the time he's hitting the end of this contract, Patrick Mahomes is going to be one of the most underpaid quarterbacks in the league. I'm almost wondering, if you're a quarterback now, get the 1 to 3 year deals, and just every time that salary cap goes up, renew and make more money. So, I don't expect to see anything long-term with Aaron Rodgers, but, where he could land next year is a big talking point. Like you said, though, Kyle, I think maybe 70% a couple weeks ago, and now it's just slowly dropping, and I'm just slowly coming to the reality that he is probably going to be in Green Bay again. Another big guy, though, that is getting talked about moving right now is Russell Wilson. And, we heard this last offseason, and he put together that weird list. Who was it? Like the Jets, the Bears, and like teams that you wouldn't expect anybody to want to go to, but that's where Russell Wilson wanted to go. And now we're getting some rumblings that he might want to go to Washington. Alfredo, help me out here. What are we supposed to make of Russell Wilson? Is he going to be in Seattle again, or is this one where he might actually move?
Okay, so I'm sorry. I'm gonna cop out, and I'm gonna give you the super boring answer again. I just don't think he goes anywhere, man. Like, I think that Pete Carroll already came out, I believe it was yesterday or 2 days ago, and he's just like, I don't envision us, moving Russell Wilson. And you can kind of decide how much of that is coach speak, and they're going to say all that. And now Russ is saying that he's not quite sure that he wants it to move, or maybe he does. And it's all posturing. It's all just posturing for the sake of, I want to get the attention. I want to get the notoriety. I want you just tell me I'm doing a good job. Like, give me a gold star, give me a little more money, and it's just, the players want to be more in control than they ever have in the past. And if there's a team that could make an absolute just move for a big time quarterback, I do think that it could be Washington, just because I think that they're getting to the point that ownership over there just really wants to kick off this whole new era of the Commanders with a bang, and go out and get the quarterback that they've been wanting for a long time. Ron Rivera's a little bit older, so I do think it's possible, but I think they're probably going to end up with someone like Jimmy Garoppolo, or someone a lot less fun than Russell Wilson.
So I want to talk about that then, because we've kind of hit on the big names that are potentially moving this offseason. And I think we're all kind of in agreement that a lot of these guys are probably going to go back to their original team. So I'll put you on the spot here a little bit, Kyle, but who is one quarterback that you do expect to see move this offseason? Who you say is probably most likely to play on a different team, whether it be through trade or free agency this offseason?
Yeah, there's two names that immediately, and they're not exactly the most sexy, but there are two names that come to mind. And one is Jimmy Garoppolo, where I think that we look at Trey Lance and we say, okay, he's most likely going to be the starter next year. And I put that percentage at like 95%, where, okay, he's going to be the starter for San Francisco next year. That means that Jimmy Garoppolo, who has 1 year left on his deal, is going to most likely be traded or released. He'll be in the mix to be the starting quarterback for another team this next year, potentially Pittsburgh. And then we look at another name here is Mitchell Trubisky. And as Bears fans, we're very familiar with Trubisky and what he could be, can be, is, whatever, however you want to classify it. And all indications here, the buzz is just absolutely growing that Mitchell Trubisky, him sitting this past year in Buffalo in a positive environment there, out away from Matt Nagy, was just tremendous for him. And so I think that he is going to get another shot to be a starting quarterback in the NFL. And again, you look at situations here like Pittsburgh. If Indianapolis moves on from Carson Wentz, does Mitchell Trubisky just get dropped right into that situation? Like, I think that he's going to get another shot to be a starting quarterback, whether that is a 1 to 2 year deal. It's not going to be a long-term contract extension, but another chance to prove himself. And so I think that Trubisky is the one that I'm really interested to see, right? Because now that we had that question of, Is it Matt Nagy? Is it Mitchell Trubisky? Now that we are a little bit further down the road, we can say, okay, it was most likely Matt Nagy. So now at least I want to see Mitchell Trubisky get another shot and see what he can do. And I think that he is going to get the opportunity to do that this next season.
Yeah, and I mean, that was just 4 years of nonstop conversation in Chicago. Is it Mitchell Trubisky or is it Matt Nagy? And then I think last year it kind of answered the question for us. But Brandon Beane, the GM over in Buffalo, has just been singing praises about Mitchell Trubisky. And I don't even think it's a hot take anymore. I see a lot of people starting to parrot this now that next to Malik Wilson, Mitchell Trubisky is probably better than every incoming rookie in this draft. So, a lot of people would rather just go out and bring him in on the 1 year prove it deal than invest a first round pick in some of these other quarterbacks that have such big question marks around them. Last thing I want to talk about, though, as far as quarterbacks, are the three guys that are free agents that I personally think all deserve a shot as a starter, and that is Jameis Winston, Marcus Mariota, and then who we just talked about, Mitchell Trubisky. Alfredo, start us off here and just rank these guys. Jameis, Mariota, Trubisky. Who do you think is 1, 2, and 3 out of that bunch?
All right, so I'm going to go reverse order for you. My number 3 out of that bunch would be Marcus Mariota. Man, it'd be really fun to see him be a starting quarterback again. I don't know if there's going to be a team that takes a shot on him with that. But the other two guys, Trubisky and Jameis, I mean, they both have legitimate shots at being starters again this year, whether it's, Trubisky going to a place like Pittsburgh, Washington. I even saw New Orleans being another place. That'd be, great for him. Jameis, I don't know why. I just see it happening of him returning to Tampa and going back into that Bruce Arians system. So it's interesting though, because like both of these guys are going to be really cheap, and so I think that teams are just going to be if the teams that don't make the big trade or can't trade up to go get the quarterback they want in the draft, they just don't like him. Go and get a cheap stopgap quarterback for a year, 2 years, let him prove it. And Trubisky, I think, is the guy that probably has the higher potential out of the three. But for fantasy purposes, and this is my really long road way to get back to the original question you asked, for fantasy purposes, all right, now I've got Jameis ranked as my QB 25, Trubisky as my 29, and then Marcus Mariota in the mid 30s.
All right. And obviously landing spot could shake that up quite a bit, but just imagine if every team that drafted a quarterback in the first round and it didn't pan out that well, just got to ship him off to Sean Payton for a couple of years and then bring him back. Because I'm with you. I love the idea of Jameis going back to Tampa Bay. That would be great news for Mike Evans, Chris Godwin. We saw him support 2 wide receiver ones last time he was there. So I would love to see it. But same question to you, Kyle. Mitchell Trubisky, Marcus Mariota, Jameis Winston. How are you ranking these guys as free agents?
I'm with Alfredo that Marcus Mariota is the number 3 option for me. The most that we've seen Mariota on the field over the past several years has been as like a read option guy coming in for Derek Carr in the red zone, and he keeps the ball every single time, right? So like that's the most that we've seen from Marcus Mariota. I don't have confidence that he can be a true starting quarterback in the NFL here again. And then we got that tier of Jameis Winston and Mitchell Trubisky. I think I'm going to go with Winston there as the top guy, and then Trubisky there as the second one, just because with Winston, we've seen it. We've seen him produce fantastic numbers in the past. Now, obviously, we had the interceptions to go along with it, but Trubisky, we've seen flashes, we've seen potential, but it hasn't really stuck and at least produced over the long haul. And again, we can look back at it and say, okay, was that Matt Nagy? And most likely, yes, but it's pretty close with Jameis Winston and Mitchell Trubisky. I'm going to give the slight edge to Jameis Winston just because we've seen him do it in the past. He sat for the past couple of years with Sean Payton. Hopefully that ironed out. And even when he was playing last year, like we saw that he was producing pretty well. It just wasn't a ton of passing volume to inflate those stats. So I think that Winston would be the top guy there for me. If I am a GM looking at the free agent quarterback market, I'd be looking at Winston, then Mitchell Trubisky, and then Mariota third.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people just kind of scoff the idea of Mitchell Trubisky because of his output during his time in Chicago. But for anybody listening to this that isn't sold on Mitchell Trubisky being able to be a starter, go look up his highlights from the game against Tampa Bay when he threw for 6 touchdowns. I mean, this guy showed his potential there, wasn't really able to do it consistently, but I think that he does deserve another shot. Love to see what he can do. And Kyle, let's switch over to wide receivers, and I'm going to start you off with this one because I think as Bears fans, we're pretty tied into this situation here, and it seems like Allen Robinson is just getting so disrespected right now after a pretty down 2020 season. And I just want to talk about this. It was obviously his worst season ever, where he didn't have a season-ending injury. Do you think he's kind of a sneaky buy in fantasy, or are we worried that at his age, with the volume that he's taken, with the hits that he's taken, that he is just falling off of that age cliff?
I'm not worried about him falling off. I still think that he is a very, very solid wide receiver. He can be a wide receiver 1 for an NFL franchise. And I do think that he's at the point in his career where he's made enough money where I think that he's going to now say, as he heads into free agency, 1, buy Chicago. Number 2, okay, I'm going to take less money and I'm going to go play with a top tier quarterback. So whether that looks like him playing in Buffalo next year or Kansas City or, like one of these situations where he's really going to be able to put up numbers. And I think that that's really what he wants, is to have the respect back on his name. From a fantasy perspective and a dynasty perspective, you ask if he's one of the a buy low player, a player that we should be buying in dynasty. I absolutely think so. However, I think that opportunity to buy was a while back, was in the season. Right now, everyone is kind of now realizing, okay, he's heading into free agency and he could easily see that opportunity increase. So I think that he's one of these guys right now where if you've got Allen Robinson still on your roster, you shouldn't be selling him because you want to see what happens here in free agency in just a couple weeks. And you said that right at the top of the show, that free agency is in a couple weeks. And I was like, man, what happened to the NFL offseason? Man, that went by in a blink of an eye. But I think that with Allen Robinson, I think that he's one of the guys that we should be looking to acquire. But I think the opportunity to buy him at just like absolute lowest price is now behind us. You're probably going to have to pay up just a little bit. And that obviously has some risk because of what we saw this past season.
Yeah. And something that I just want to add to this is I feel like people that were really plugged into the Chicago media could have kind of seen this coming. I mean, it was a really weird situation in the offseason where Allen Robinson was getting almost no reps with Justin Fields. Like, everybody knew that Justin Fields was going to take over at some point, but still, for whatever reason, Andy Dalton was getting all of his reps in. I don't understand why you take your premier wide receiver and focus on building a chemistry with a bridge quarterback. But hey, that's why Matt Nagy doesn't have a job right now. But I think the writing was kind of on the wall that we could have expected a down season from Allen Robinson because of how the offseason shook out. Another big thing is that when you have a player like Allen Robinson, he's not the guy that's going to get 3-5 yards of separation and be wide open on an island. He's a contested catch guy. And in order for Justin Fields to trust him to make those passes, they needed to work on that chemistry. So I was really nervous watching how camp shook out, and I wanted almost nothing to do with Allen Robinson once I realized that him and Justin Fields weren't getting those reps together. I'm with you, though. I think that there is still potential for him to have a bounce back season in a good position, like you mentioned, possibly landing in Buffalo. I don't think it's crazy to see him with the top 15, top 20 season heading into next year. Alfredo, wrap us up, though. Do you have anything to add on Allen Robinson?
Yeah, I think that it's like you said, he's going to be the slam dunk obvious buy low guy, but that's also the problem, is that he's the obvious buy low guy and no one wants to sell him. For context, I've got him right now in the middle, and kind of like a low end wide receiver 3 range as we wait to see where he's going to land. If he does land in one of the places that Yates mentioned, then yeah, his value is going to shoot up, even if it's just for like the next 2 years. But this is a guy that I think that right now, as you get a little bit, for dynasty purposes, if you're getting a little bit closer to your rookie drafts and all of a sudden those draft picks start to look more and more valuable, you can probably throw a mid or early second round pick at to the Allen Robinson manager and try to make a deal happen, because from this draft class, I don't know that you're going to get that much or more value than a guy like Allen Robinson.
So let me throw out 2 quick, this guy or this guy. Looking at Allen Robinson or Brandon Cooks, who would you currently prefer in Dynasty? Yates, how about you first?
I'll go with Allen Robinson there. I think Brandon Cooks could potentially get traded this offseason. That's been a rumor here with Houston, he should. And he should have gotten traded last year. But I think that, so he could end up in a great situation. But again, Allen Robinson could as well. So we're kind of in like a holding pattern with each of these guys. I'm going to take Allen Robinson, though, because I'm a bit more of a believer in the talent level of him versus Brandon Cooks.
Couldn't agree more. Alfredo, are you on the same page here?
This is kind of what I like to call a player A, player B situation. I don't know if you've heard of that before, Dave. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I don't know. So it's like, to me, I would say that Allen is just like Yates said. Allen Robinson is going to be that guy that gives you kind of the higher ceiling, the better talent. He has that ability to be the alpha guy. We know what Brandon Cooks is. He's kind of that safe PPR floor guy. How good is the offense in Houston really going to be? So landing spot's going to matter, but if I had to pick it in a vacuum, the ceiling for Allen Robinson is just higher, and I'd lean that direction.
Then let me throw out one more of this or that. Allen Robinson or Mike Williams. Alfredo?
Ooh, that one's different. Okay. Only because I've never...
Even though Robinson's been in the league a lot longer, they're still the same age, which is kind of surprising.
That's crazy.
Yeah, man, I think that like we saw what life could be like if Mike Williams was the primary target. The problem is we just don't get that a whole lot. Right. And then we saw him just kind of crash back down to earth. This is not going to be popular, but I don't care. I'm going to say it anyways. I think I would take Allen Robinson over Mike Williams at this point. Obviously, landing spot's going to matter, but I think one guy could actually be a legitimate alpha on a team, and Mike Williams just hasn't shown it yet.
I like it. Yates, are you in the same boat here?
I will go with Allen Robinson as well. I had Austin Gale of PFF on my podcast just here recently, and he said that he's hearing that Mike Williams wants to stay in LA and is willing to take less money to do so. So we could see him reunite with Justin Herbert this next year. And we saw that that could be valuable for fantasy purposes. However, it's different than him heading to a Jacksonville, a Detroit, one of these situations where he is the unquestioned wide receiver one. And with Williams, we have an injury history to talk about as well. So yeah, I think that it's the slightest edge for me for Allen Robinson over Mike Williams.
I just want some sort of confirmation if he does go back to the Chargers. Are they going to use him like they used in the first half of the season where he was a low ADOT, high volume guy? Or are they going to do what they did with him for his first 4 years in the second half of last season where they just chuck it 30 yards downfield and let him do his thing? I would love to see this guy get a little bit more involved like we saw in the front half of the 2021 season. Anyway, I was expecting some, disrespect to Allen Robinson here. It seems like anybody I've talked to about Allen Robinson over the last couple months has had nothing but terrible things to say, but I'm glad that we're all kind of on the same page that he's a little bit of a value right now and probably a bit suppressed from where he should be. Stick with wide receivers, though, and two wide receivers that I have been enamored with that are both set to hit free agency this year. Two of my favorite wide receivers to watch in the league, Chris Godwin and Michael Gallup. They both had late season ACL injuries. Do you think there's any chance that either of these guys are going to be relevant in fantasy in the next season? Kyle, go ahead and start us off here.
Oh, absolutely. These guys will be absolutely fantasy relevant. Chris Godwin. So I will just say this right now. I have Chris Godwin, Michael Gallup, and Allen Robinson all on one dynasty roster. So this offseason could go really, really well for me or very, very poorly. So I think, yes, absolutely, they're going to be fantasy relevant. They're too talented of players to not be. And Chris Godwin, all signs are pointing currently that he is going to be back in Tampa Bay. Who's the quarterback? That's going to be the greater question as to what that level of relevance is for Chris Godwin. But ACL injuries at this point are, if we can have Cam Akers come back in 5.5 months from an Achilles tear, ACL injuries are really nothing that is holding. It's obviously different for each player, so I don't want to speak in uncertainties here, but it's not necessarily the same that it was way back in the day. So with Chris Godwin, I think that he's going to be fantasy relevant. The quarterback, if Tampa Bay takes a big swing at a quarterback, then he could be back in the top 12 conversation for next year. Michael Gallup could be back in Dallas next year, or he could hit free agency. The relevance and the level of relevance hinges on Amari Cooper. If he is back in Dallas, does Amari Cooper get traded? And then at that situation, Michael Gallup would be the wide receiver 2 or 1A, 1B, depending on how you look at it, with CeeDee Lamb in that offense. So if that's the situation, we know the talent level of Gallup. We know the talent level of Godwin. These guys can easily be top 15 wide receivers. Just going to come down to who their quarterback is to determine if they can hit that ceiling.
Yeah, I would love to see Gallup just take a bet on himself and go to a team where he can be the unquestioned wide receiver one. Obviously Chicago's looking for something like that, somebody to complement Darnell Mooney, but we already talked about Detroit. They've got Amon-Ra St. Brown, but they're very different play styles. Jacksonville, I would love to see Gallup go somewhere where he can prove that he has what it takes to be a wide receiver one, because I think he has all of the makings to be a premier guy in the league. And Alfredo, same thing to you. Are these guys that you're actively going out and getting? I know we talked about the injury risk. It seems like it was 8 years ago that Adrian Peterson made us not concerned about ACLs anymore. Last year, we had Cam Akers do it with the Achilles injury, and I'm really hoping that Travis Etienne can come back this year so we can stop being concerned about Liz Frank injuries. But how are you feeling about Michael Gallup and Chris Godwin next year?
So yeah, you brought the right guests onto the show because I also have these guys on a dynasty roster together. And so I'm very concerned about Chris Godwin right now and hoping that Kyle Trask is not the quarterback going into the next season. But both of these guys, we've seen it, obviously the talent, and more so with Godwin over the years, that they can both not only be fantasy relevant, but be very, very good fantasy players for your team. Just like you said, it's going to depend on landing spot. Do they stay in the same spot? The thought that Amari Cooper might be out of Dallas, I think actually might be best case scenario for Gallup to stay there in Dallas. And it's just CeeDee Lamb and Gallup. And then especially if even Dalton Schultz is gone then too. And it's just like, okay, we got a lot of targets in a high powered offense. The one thing in this is where I will just say, like, we kind of have to pay attention to them in the offseason. This is my quick moment to plug my co-host, Dr. Vignesh Doraiswamy. I've been talking to him about one of my favorite college prospects, Jameis Williams, who's coming off of an ACL injury. And, I sent him the video that I saw yesterday of Jameis doing like his balancing stuff. And I'm like, dude, look, man, he's ahead of schedule. He's going to be so, and he's like, just take a minute, chill. He's like, the ACLs, yes, these players can come back, but it doesn't mean that they're going to be going full force in camp. It doesn't even mean that they're going to be ready weeks 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This might be one of those things where we see that they're going to start out slow, kind of like how we saw with Saquon Barkley last year, where they might get game managed for the first couple weeks of their season. So they could be very relevant, but I think it's going to be something to at least watch and consider as, how are they practicing? What are they getting into? ACLs aren't as dangerous anymore, and they'll probably have a lot more long-term value, but the short term, that could be worrisome. So just something to keep track of.
Yeah, I'm going to have to talk to you after we're done recording here, or maybe just reach out to Dr. Vig directly and see what's going on with Etienne, because I will say, that is a concerning injury, and I'm a little bit concerned with how long it took.
I'm an expert. I had the Lisfranc fracture in my foot.
Really?
It sucks. Yes, it's horrible.
NFL level or NFL caliber athlete as well.
I'm just below that bar. I'm just below that bar. The people on my college flag football team would tell you I'm just below that rung.
So did you have the fracture and surgery, or was it just a sprain or dislocation for you?
Fracture and surgery. It's tough, man. It's tough because you kind of always feel like your foot's not quite back together. And so planting and turning and cutting, it does take at least a calendar year for you to get comfortable. And then usually year 2 is when you're back to full speed. So you might see about a good 90% of Travis Etienne this year. 90% of him is better than a lot of players. So
right.
Don't be too
better than 0% of James Robinson, which is what we're expecting at the start of the season. All right. Another wide receiver that I want to talk about, though, that is set to hit free agency is Will Fuller. And I mean, we know what this guy can do when he's healthy. The problem is, I don't know if we're ever going to see a fully healthy Will Fuller. I'm very, cautious to slap an injury-prone label on a player. But if there's one guy I had to do it on, it would probably be Will Fuller. So, Kyle, start us off here. I mean, just simply, are you in or are you out on Will Fuller in fantasy?
I was out on him all last year, and it paid off. I really did not have any interest in Will Fuller in Miami. I think that was even before his injury. I was like, he's detached from Deshaun Watson. This is a situation where I just really don't even want to invest, and it obviously paid off with him. I mean, it's a thumb injury, right? Like, it wasn't anything massive, and it was just something that he literally could not recover from. So he's one of the guys, unless he falls into just a beautiful situation from a fantasy perspective in free agency. And I can't see that happening, where NFL teams are going to be like, yeah, let's bring in Will Fuller. If he only got a 1-year deal from Miami last year, who desperately needed wide receivers, I can't see him getting a more than a 1-year deal this year after missing all of last season. So yeah, it's just one of the situations now as we look at him heading into free agency, unless he falls into one of the best possible scenarios from a fantasy perspective, I'll be all out on him again in 2022.
And Alfredo, I'm sure you've got a pretty emotional response to Will Fuller. I mean, you guys put a lot of money into him and then got, close to no production. So same question, in or out on Will Fuller?
I'm going to give you a totally rational, very long-winded answer. I'm out.
All right.
That's it.
I mean, honestly, I am kind of with you. There have been a few startups that I've been in this offseason where I'm like, well, he fell to a great value. Maybe he'll make it back to the next round. And then he comes back to me in the next round and I'm like, maybe next round. And I just can't pull the trigger. I mean, I have no interest in, rostering somebody that probably isn't going to be able to suit up for too much next season. The last receiver I want to talk about, though, is JuJu Smith-Schuster. It seems like it was just yesterday that everybody was saying JuJu Smith-Schuster is the dynasty wide receiver 1 overall. And I mean, it was a good take at the time, but since then, we just haven't really seen consistent play. We've seen injuries, but it's kind of crazy to think with how long he's been in the league that JuJu is still just 25 years old. Alfredo, start us off here. Where's the ideal landing spot for JuJu Smith-Schuster to turn it back and be a dominant force in fantasy again?
So I'm going to cheat here a little bit. I've got 2. Okay, I think that one that's maybe a little bit more realistic might be Chicago. I'm trying to earn points here with you guys. This right? We earn points, right? Okay, yes. Cool. I'm winning. Cool. All right.
Tony Reali.
No, I actually do think that Chicago makes a lot of sense. And as you guys know, the new GM Ryan Poles, they're doing their research on how rookie quarterbacks take that leap going into the second year. And he said it's having a wide receiver they can count on. And they kind of already have that deep threat guy with Mooney. And they've got, Cole Kmet as a guy that they can rely on in the red zone and in the middle of the field. And I think having a guy like a JuJu Smith-Schuster that can kind of take on that Keenan Allen role that he had for Justin Herbert, that could really help Justin Fields going into this next season. And I think that could actually give JuJu a lot of volume in that offense. The other one, which I think is probably a bigger dream scenario, and it's the fancier place, would be going to Buffalo with Cole Beasley and Emmanuel Sanders likely on the way out, him kind of going in and just filling that role. You got Gabe Davis on one side, Diggs on the other side, and JuJu kind of handling the slot. That would just be wild to watch. So those are my two spots for him.
So I think what I'm hearing is you're saying Chicago needs a short kind of possession receiver, somebody like maybe Allen Robinson could fill that role. I'm not going to get over that one. No, what a disappointing season. But Yates, same to you. Where is your dream landing spot for JuJu Smith-Schuster this offseason? And I mean, is he somebody that you're actively trying to acquire right now?
He isn't. He's someone that I think could fall into a good spot and could be fantasy relevant. I just don't know if that's ever going to be back up to the tier. No, I mean, let alone the dynasty wide receiver one's completely out of the conversation. I think even a top 12 guy is out of the conversation. Right. But as far as like a dynasty wide receiver two, I just don't even know if that's really in the realm of possibilities for JuJu at this point of his career. So I think with JuJu, he's going to have to fall into a spot where the volume is there. And I think that a situation is, I think Chicago is a good one. I think Buffalo, they're up against the cap, so it's something to watch too. But again, the salary cap is a made up thing, and where all the points matter or points don't matter, and everything's made up, whatever. So JuJu is like, I think a situation for him, Houston. I think we look at Houston here, and regardless of who the quarterback is, that's a spot where he could walk in and see a ton of volume out of the slot. You'll have Nico Collins there, maybe Brandon Cooks. So then you got Collins, Cooks, and then JuJu out of the slot. I think that's a spot where he would see plenty of volume. And he's not known as someone who's going to create a ton of yards after the catch. He's not necessarily one of these guys who's going to break a ton of tackles in the open field like a Jalen Waddle and just create on his own. But he could be that possession style volume receiver, and Houston would desperately need that. So it's not a sexy spot. We think of a receiver going to Houston, we're like, ew, no, thank you. But I think that the volume would be there. I think the volume would be there if he does go there with Davis Mills or potentially Deshaun Watson as his quarterback.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think it would make sense. And I do expect Houston to go out and sign one of these big wide receivers this offseason. But part of me just wishes that they'd go in next season with what they've got and focus on Brevin Jordan and Nico Collins. Those are two of my favorite prospects. Love those guys. I'd like to see what they have. And I'm afraid that they're going to go out and sign some big splashy guy that will take a little piece of their pie. Now, we talked about quarterbacks, we talked about wide receivers, and every question we were kind of highlighting one guy. I wanted to do the same with running backs, but there really isn't a name that jumps off the sheet like, oh, wow, that guy's available. I mean, it's a pretty weak class of free agent running backs and a pretty weak class of incoming rookies. So just kind of talking about all these guys that are potentially available: Melvin Gordon, Leonard Fournette, Rashad Penny, Sony Michel, James Conner, Ronald Jones. I mean, those are the biggest names, but where is a landing spot? Because I think all of these guys would succeed if they land on the right team. So Kyle, start us off here. What do you think is the best landing spot in general for a free agent running back where you could bump a guy up, 10, 15 spots in your rankings?
I think the first one that jumps to mind is Miami, where we've got Myles Gaskin, we've got Savon Ahmed, we've got Duke Johnson, we've got Malcolm Brown. We've rolled like the Rolodex of running backs here over the past couple of years, and it just has not turned into anything productive from a fantasy perspective, at least consistently. I think if you put a Leonard Fournette, if you put even Ronald Jones, if you put any of these guys into Melvin Gordon, even if you put any of them into Miami in that offense, I do think that they would have some success from a fantasy perspective. So that's a situation that I'm monitoring. Another one would be Buffalo. I know that Devin Singletary took a major step forward over the final 6 games of the season for them, but I don't think that Singletary is going to be the type of player that can hold up to a massive workload over the entirety of the season. So if you can bring in a Melvin Gordon on a very cheap contract, if you can roll the dice with Rashad Penny, even Sony Michel, like on a 1 to 2 year deal, and have that be a tandem backfield, I think that that's a situation that would lend itself to fantasy relevance, obviously, with how dynamic that offense is. So that's a situation to monitor too. I look at Miami as one that if a free agent running back lands there, I'm definitely going to pay attention. And then Buffalo would obviously be another one. It just depends on how exactly they view Devin Singletary and what he did over the last half of the season.
Yeah, and it seems like this is kind of what we talked about last offseason too, where Miami, Buffalo, and then Atlanta and Arizona, those were the really desirable spots for running backs. And now here we are a year later, kind of looking at those as the same desirable running back landing spots. So let's focus on Miami on this question, Alfredo, since that's the team that probably needs a running back more than anybody else. Who's a free agent that you'd like to see land there?
Oh man, okay. So who's if we're going out of like my sheer fandom, I'd love to see Melvin Gordon come down and play in Miami, just because I do feel like out of the group of free agents, he and Leonard Fournette probably have the best skill set, and they've been able to handle the load and carry that. And I think could be a good mentor to a nice young rookie coming back in. I just don't know if they're going to go out and spend on one of the top guys, despite having the money. I think they're going to put a lot of their money into somewhere else. And I think that you might see Mike McDaniel kind of take that Kyle Shanahan method of building the team and, let's go and draft a couple of young running backs, let them duke it out. And then of course we're going to let the 6th round guy be the starter all season long. So ideally I'd love to see one of the bigger names like Melvin Gordon or Leonard Fournette. I just don't know that it's actually going to happen.
You know who I think is going to end up being the week 1 running back that I've been trying to acquire everywhere I can for the Miami Dolphins? Matt Breida. He's got the connection with McDaniel already. He knows the zone blocking scheme, and he's fast. And that's, I think, if they're going to try to mimic,
he was just there.
That they had. Exactly. And I think that he might be coming back. I think that's a good pick. He's a guy that I've been kind of, you can get him for free right now in Dynasty, 18th, 20th round, something like that. I like that, but I think that we're all on the same page here that whoever lands in Miami is going to immediately shoot up draft boards because they just haven't been able to figure it out. And we know that Mike McDaniel is going to be committed to the run. All right, we talked a lot about free agents here, but I know both of you guys, your strength is in prospecting and rookies and looking at the incoming class that comes in. So, Alfredo, start us off here. I just want to give you the floor for a minute to go ahead and tout your favorite incoming rookie. It could be, your 101, or it could be some sleeper that you're trying to get in the 3rd round of all of your rookie drafts. The floor is yours. Tell us about your favorite rookie in this class.
All right, so at this point, I know I'm a little bit different than everybody else when it comes to the RB1 and the wide receiver 1 for me. And this might be like the scouting brain fighting the fantasy brain, but I've still got Kenneth Walker as my RB1. And I think a lot of people are counting him out simply because they didn't see the numbers and they didn't see the usage, but all the teams he was on, they didn't use running backs to catch the ball. I mean, he had nearly half of the running back receptions at Michigan State. So I still have Kenneth Walker as my RB1. A lot of that is going to change, but depending on his weight, depending on his landing spot. I think Isaiah Spiller is right behind him for me. I'm one of the weirdos that's not fully sold on Breece Hall. And then from the wide receiver position, you too, Yates?
Yep. I'm watching his combine today. I'm watching what he runs because that is going to matter a ton for Breece Hall.
Yep. And for me at the wide receiver spot, a guy that we're talking about, a guy that can run. It's Jameson Williams. I brought him up earlier. Once again, it's my scouting brain fighting my fantasy brain, but Jameson Williams to me was the wide receiver 1. Everything I saw on film was better than every other wide receiver in this class. I know he doesn't have the size of Treylon Burks and Drake London, and we all get really hot and bothered over the 6'3", 225-pound guy. But we got to remember, we're not the ones that get to take these prospects and mold them and utilize them. Landing spot is going to matter so much. Jameson Williams is the guy that can just go out there day one. You can't teach speed. Hopefully he still has it after this ACL injury. So those are my guys up at the top. And then I just want to throw a really quick sleeper out there at running back. I happen to be doing my deep dive, and a guy that I just came away really liking on film. He's not going to wow you. He's not super explosive, but Kennedy Brooks, the running back out of Oklahoma, is a guy that's not getting talked about a lot from a fantasy perspective. NFL draft people seem to really like him, and I did too. He's got a smooth running style. He's a good outside zone runner. He reminds me a lot of Elijah Mitchell coming out, and I'll probably get some flack for that because you can't just compare the new rookies to the ones that succeeded last year. But he's very similar. He doesn't have that breakaway speed, but he gets chunk yardage, and he could be one of those guys in the right situation. Just works. And in your rookie drafts, you're probably getting him in like the late 3rd round or something ridiculously late. So I think he's worth a swing.
Well, I will be checking out Kennedy Brooks because it was just last offseason that you were touting Elijah Mitchell and Khalil Herbert. So I will be sure to take a look at your sleeper. Kyle, same question to you, though, before we wrap up here. The floor is yours. Tell us about some of one of your favorite rookies this season.
I'll look at both the running back and wide receiver position. I'll throw some sleeper names out there. So for me, at running back, Jerome Ford out of Cincinnati. We need to be talking more about Jerome Ford and what he brings to the table. This is a guy who is at RB5 in my rankings, one spot behind Breece Hall. So I think that Jerome Ford is going to come out here in the 40-yard dash, and he's going to surprise a lot of people. I think he's going to run in the low 4.4s. And if that is the case, he brings speed to this overall draft class, which is not there. But then also, not only does he have the top end speed, the home run speed to be able to, or the home run threat, but he also can combine that with some power. He's a former Alabama running back. We saw him this past year against Alabama really combine that speed with power. He was able to lower his pads, drive through contact, and showcase that he can play with power at his size as well. So Jerome Ford, barely anybody's talking about this guy. He's sitting at RB5 currently in my pre-draft rankings. At wide receiver, there's George Pickens that we need to talk about George Pickens way more than we currently are. He's at wide receiver 3 in my rankings, but let's go further down the board. I'm going to talk about Sky Moore, the wide receiver out of Western Michigan. If you guys have not had a chance to watch his tape yet, please make sure that you do, because he is an absolutely skilled route runner. I think he is on par with like the top tier of this class as far as route running ability. He has a fantastic understanding of leverage, of footwork at the line of scrimmage, in press. I was talking to his former wide receiver coach at Western Michigan, and he said that Sky is the smartest player that he has ever been around. So I think he's going to come out and run in the potentially 4.4s here at the 40-yard dash, if that's the case. I think that he not only has the ability to be that slot receiver underneath who can create separation at will, then he can also stretch the field on slot fades. And we saw that time and time again at Western Michigan. So one of the guys that I am definitely looking at, and watching his tape, I compared him to Julian Edelman. Just one of the comparisons that just immediately popped off. And he measured in today at 5'10", 195 pounds. What were Julian Edelman's measurements? 5'10", 195 pounds. So I think that Sky Moore, it could easily have a very, very long career in the NFL as a slot receiver. We're not talking enough about him.
Absolutely love it. I hope everybody watching this was taking notes, because you just got some great info from some of the best in the business right here. Before we sign off, one last time, just let everyone know where they can find your content, what you got working on this offseason, and all that fun stuff. Alfredo, start us off.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Alfredo Brown GM, and then you can follow our show. We're on YouTube, we're on Apple, anywhere you get podcasts, and it's the Pretend GM. You can find us on Twitter at the Pretend GM. Myself and my co-host Dr. Vig, he's a practicing physician, and I'm a former scout, and I think we bring a really cool dynamic to the dynasty game. And we try to keep everything short, and we pride ourselves on being the podcast that teaches you how to manage your team, as opposed to us just telling you, hey, go and do this, and then we'll get blamed for it later. Now we have a built-in excuse for when we're wrong. We taught you and you messed up. But we've got a lot of cool stuff coming up this offseason. We're doing our rookie evaluations. We're going to be bringing on some really big name guests. We're just trying to lock down the scheduled dates. But it's going to be a lot of fun going into rookie season here.
Yeah, could not recommend the Pretend GM enough. You guys are doing awesome things over there. Like I said at the beginning of the show, an absolute rising star in the industry. Thanks for coming on, Alfredo. Kyle, let everyone know where they can find you on social media, what you got going on this offseason, your YouTube, and all of that fun stuff.
Absolutely. Like I said earlier, starting my own company over at the Fantasy Playbook. So the ffplaybook.com. You can find the YouTube channel over at youtube.com/the Fantasy Playbook. I can be found on Twitter at Kyle Y NFL. And then the Patreon is over at patreon.com/the Fantasy Playbook. So make sure to check all that out. Of course, we got the podcast with some amazing guests already. Had 5 episodes in, just had Field Yates on here recently, Austin Gale over at PFF, JJ Zacharias, and Brett Coleman, all these amazing guests. So make sure to check out the podcast as well.
Absolutely. And thank you to everyone that tuned in for another episode of The Launchpad. I'm your host, Dave Kluge. You can find me on Twitter at Dave Kluge. That's Kluge. Be sure to tune in every single week at youtube.com/footballguys so you can check this show out. And I will see you next week. Thanks so much for tuning in. Just a reminder that you can find me on Twitter at Dave Kluge. Be sure to look at the right side of your screen where you can not only subscribe to the YouTube page, but you'd also sign up for our daily email newsletter, as well as checking out some of our most recent videos on the Football Guys channel. That's youtube.com/footballguys. Be sure to drop a comment down below and let us know what you think. Thanks, and I'll see you next week.